Although Jobs was the founder and creative force of Apple, the Apple Board of Directors wanted an experienced executive to be president of the company. Jobs interviewed dozens of candidates before he focused on someone from outside the tech world, Pepsi CEO John Sculley.
I wasn't really interested in joining Apple or being the CEO of Apple. I thought I was highly unqualified. But Steve, in those days, he had long black hair and very piercing palmetto berry eyes. He looked down at his running shoes, and then he looked up at me. And he said, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?"
With that famous question, legendary Apple founder Steve Jobs persuaded John Sculley to give up a successful career at Pepsi to join him and become CEO of Apple. During his 10 years at Apple, he launched desktop publishing and the PowerBook, the most successful notebook computer at that time. Revenue was up 1,000% over Sculley's decade with Apple, and Apple became the most profitable computer company in the world. 2 years after Sculley worked for Apple, Steve Jobs left the company he had founded. Was it true that Sculley was the one who had fired Steve Jobs then? What did Sculley do before joining Apple to become known as one of the world's most respected marketing innovators? And what did he do after leaving Apple so that he earned the reputation as one of America's best-known business leaders of all time? Here come the answers.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Talk Vietnam. Today you'll get a great chance to hear from one of America's best-known business leaders. His name is Mr. John Sculley. Now, Mr. Sculley was the former CEO and president of Pepsi. He was also the former CEO of Apple Computer, now known as Apple Incorporated. Mr. Sculley has worked with Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and other amazingly influential people in order to leave a great imprint on the world. Now, we're very lucky to have Mr. Sculley here in our studio today to hear his stories from the viewpoint of being one of the most respected marketing innovators of the world. Mr. Sculley later on will also reveal some of the details about the recent investments he has made here in Vietnam, why he wants to do business here, and some of his advices for early stage entrepreneurs here in the country. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Sculley. Thank you very much, sir, for coming to our studio. How are you today?
I'm very well, and I'm very excited to be in Hanoi. This is my first trip to Hanoi. I've been to Vietnam before, but not to the city, so it's very exciting to be here.
Wonderful. What is your kind of first impression of Vietnam? You know, going back to your first trip, when was that?
My first trip was 10 years ago, and what is very much apparent to me is how many young people there are in Vietnam. And I've had a chance to meet with students in science and engineering and mathematics, and the range of technology, competence, the curiosity that young people have here. It's very, very invigorating to be exposed to that.
But first of all, let's talk a little bit about your time, going a little bit in the past now. Tell us a little bit about your years at Apple. Before that, you were working at Pepsi, obviously in the beverage industry. What led you to move from the beverage industry into the computer industry, being Apple CEO?
Well, I was not a logical choice to go to Apple because I didn't have a technology background. I had a marketing background. And Steve Jobs, who was one of the co-founders of Apple, was only 26. They were looking for a permanent CEO for the company. Steve would have liked to have been chosen as the CEO, but the Apple board felt they needed someone who was older.
More mature, probably.
Maybe. And they gave Steve the veto right to turn down candidates, even though they wouldn't give him the job itself. And so they looked at many, many candidates before they came to me in the high-tech industry, but they weren't acceptable to Steve. And so the board decided to look outside of the tech industry. Steve had a belief that high technology, particularly Apple's products, were eventually going to be sold with the same skills and experience learned in selling products like Pepsi and Coca-Cola. And so what brought us together was we had a common interest in industrial design. He was very intrigued with how Pepsi had been able to come from a very distant number 2 to actually becoming number 1 as the largest selling consumer packaged good in America, passing Coca-Cola back in 1978. At the time that I was recruited to Apple, my first job, because I didn't bring any knowledge of how to build computers, and that was clearly something that Steve was very gifted at, my job was to keep the Apple II, which was in those days a 6-year-old aging product, commercially alive, to generate enough profits to be able to provide the cash for Steve to have the money to be able to develop the Macintosh, and then later to use the marketing experience that we had developed at Pepsi to try to translate that to launching the Macintosh.
Tell us a little bit about your relationship with Steve.
Steve and I had an incredibly good relationship during the few years that we worked together. So the fact that we ended up in a clash was really quite contrary to the relationship that we had most of the time working together. The relationship was driven by the common interest we had in beautiful design. The area that we clashed was in 1985 when Steve introduced the Macintosh Office, which was the first time that a high-quality laser printer had been connected with a graphics-based personal computer, the Macintosh. And because computer processing power was not very powerful back in 1985, the microprocessors just were not powerful enough to be able to make a Macintosh Office system effectively useful. And consequently, the product didn't sell. And Steve got very depressed and felt that we needed to drop the price of the Macintosh and shift the advertising from Apple II over to Macintosh, and maybe that would help. And I strongly disagreed with him on that, because my job was primarily to keep the cash coming in, the profits from the Apple II, and we couldn't afford to pull the marketing away from the Apple II, and we couldn't afford to lower the price of the Macintosh without jeopardizing the profitability of the company. So I said, Steve, we need to go to the board and let the board decide. So we both went to the board of directors. The board listened to Steve's reasoning as to why he wanted to drop the price of the Macintosh and move the marketing from Apple II. They listened to my reasoning why I thought that was a mistake. And then they selected the third co-founder of Apple, Mike Markkula, to go do his own investigation, independent of Steve and me, and to report back to the board, independent of Steve and me, which he did over a 10-day period. And his conclusion that he recommended to the board was, he said, John's strategy is correct, Steve is not. And the board asked Steve to step down from being the leader of the Macintosh group. He was still chairman of the board, but a number of months later, he resigned and started a new company called Next. Often myths take on an aura of reality, and one myth was that I had fired Steve Jobs.
Yes.
Actually, I have to say I feel very badly that we lost the founder, and I consider it a personal mistake on my part that I didn't go and try to recruit him back at some point later on. But the reality was Steve actually was never fired by anybody. He was demoted by the board, and then he eventually resigned from the company.
Let's talk a little bit about your visit to Vietnam this time. During his visit this time to the country, Mr. Scully held a workshop with Vietnamese entrepreneurs in Ho Chi Minh City. Let's take a look at this meeting and see what advices he gave to the Vietnamese entrepreneurs.
When asked what a working day of his was like when he remained as a CEO of Pepsi or Apple, Scully said he was typically at the company at around 5:30 or 6 in the morning, and the last meeting in the day was usually around dinner time. leaving his marks not by just so simple stories. Scully made Vietnamese CEOs admire for the knowledge and experience of a world's top CEO.
Điều thứ nhất là mình thấy là quan trọng nhất là phải là chi phí phải là tối ưu hóa. Cái điều thứ hai đó là để mà phát triển được lâu dài, chúng ta phải có sự sáng tạo. Thì qua những cái cách mà ông đã sáng tạo trong marketing để có những cái mà quảng cáo mà chỉ bỏ 1 triệu đô nhưng cuối cùng họ có lợi nhuận lên, có đạt được giảm được chi phí lên tới 45 triệu đô do những cái quảng cáo miễn phí. Đây là một bài học rất là hay trong cái sự sáng tạo trong marketing của ông.
Điều tôi cảm thấy rất là ấn tượng đối với ông đó là ông nói về cái văn hóa của người Mỹ, đó là cho phép được thất bại. Cái mà văn hóa của người châu Á mình hơi thiếu sót trong cái việc này, thì tôi nghĩ nó rất là hữu ích trong cái việc mà kinh doanh, quản trị trong công ty cũng như là đối xử với con cái tuổi trẻ sau này. Thì mình nghĩ một cái điều đó nó sẽ giúp cho cái nhóm trẻ cảm thấy tự tin hơn, không có cảm thấy bị bi đát sau những cái lần thất bại, bởi vì trong cuộc đời của mình thế nào cũng có những cái lúc mà phải thất bại, và nếu có được những cái điều như vậy thì mình cảm thấy nó tự tin để mà tiếp tục phấn đấu và thử một lần nữa. Còn nếu mà quá hà khắc hoặc nghiêm khắc với những cái thất bại của mình thì sau lần thất bại coi như là chấm hết, thì nó là sẽ không phải cái điều hay.
John Scully confirmed that success would come to those entrepreneurs whose goal and vision are beyond money.
What I've learned is that the entrepreneurs I work with never give up. And they say, well, John, we've asked you to help us for 4 years, for 5 years, now it's 6 years, and we haven't had a success yet. I said, don't worry. I said, I have watched how you work. I see your talents. I see the enthusiasm and passion you have. The destination is not the money. The money is the consequence. The destination is to make a difference. And ultimately, people who are successful with the right reasons often end up being very financially successful too.
After all, with his strong belief in the perspectives of Vietnamese economy, Scully motivated all those entrepreneurs persistent with their goal of setting up a new company or steering the existing ones after the current economic crisis.
Even though times may be tough right now in Vietnam, I'm very optimistic. I believe in globalization, and I believe that Vietnam has a wonderful future ahead of it. I'm impressed with the talented people here. I'm impressed with the work ethic. I'm impressed with just the perspective people have on life. And I think over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see many more positive times, many opportunities, and many success stories.
Interacting with these Vietnamese entrepreneurs or early stage entrepreneurs, what impressions did you have about them?
My impression is curiosity, enthusiasm, but greatly in search of role models here in Vietnam.
And as you said, a mentor is always needed.
We have the luxury in Silicon Valley or Boston that there are many role models to look to. There is a history of companies being started up and entrepreneurs being successful and then going off and doing a second or even a third company. There is not yet in Vietnam such a pattern, and there is not yet a number of role models that young entrepreneurs can look to. And so that's one of the real opportunities. And frankly, at this point in my life, I find that very exciting, that we can come to a country where there is extraordinary talent, great passion and interest to be part of the global economy, and a search for exactly what I love doing, which is mentorship.
Going back a little bit to your time at Pepsi, I understand you were Pepsi's youngest president and CEO. Can you talk a little bit about the success that you gained at Pepsi? I understand the Pepsi Challenge was one big success.
I was very fortunate that I joined Pepsi when it was a relatively small company. And it was about $220 million of annual turnover. Today it's about $90 billion of annual turnover. I never would have gotten the jobs today that I was fortunate enough to be given back in 1970 when I was appointed to the marketing vice president of Pepsi. In the early days when I was marketing VP, we started working on a lifestyle campaign called Pepsi Generation. And we had some amazingly talented creative people who were deeply involved in the creation of Pepsi Generation. But that was the first consumer experience marketing campaign. By experience marketing, I mean that when we showed the Pepsi Generation commercials, it was the beginning of color television. It was the beginning of large screen TVs. Before that, everything had been small black and white televisions. And we never showed Pepsi in the commercials. Because what we were doing was we were trying to focus on the people who used Pepsi and their life experiences. And we thought of Pepsi as really being a fashion product, and it was just the signature at the end. With the Pepsi Challenge, it was also experience marketing. But this time, we wanted to capture the experience. We actually went to markets where Pepsi was outsold 9-1 by Coca-Cola.
Wow.
And we went there, and we went to people who had never had a Pepsi in their entire life. And we did taste tests without revealing the brand name. They were called blind taste tests. And all we were interested in was catching the expression on the face of long-term Coca-Cola drinkers who had never had a Pepsi in their life when it was revealed that they had selected a Pepsi over a Coke. And so that was experience marketing. So Steve Jobs was fascinated by experience marketing because he said, so how did you guys pass Coca-Cola? And I said, well, we didn't focus on the product, we focused on the experience. And he said, I love that, because he said, I'm building this product called Macintosh, and it's all going to be about this incredibly great, as he called it, insanely great user experience. And when we developed the first Macintosh TV commercial, we never showed the product.
The marketing strategy that you had used at Pepsi, focusing on consumer experience rather than the product itself, proved to be quite successful at Apple. What were some of the other marketing strategies that you applied at Apple?
Steve was a great believer in selling products as fashion statements. And so we looked at Apple products back in the 1980s as really fashion statements in terms of how we said, people will want others to see them. And we also marketed Apple products with the perspective of Hollywood movies, because we said in the movie industry, it's all about hit products. And so our vision in the 1980s was you build only 1 or 2 products a year, and you hopefully try to build a hit product. And you put all of your talent and energy into that. Most technology companies build hundreds of products, and you don't know which one do they really care about. You know? The brilliance of Steve Jobs was that he knew exactly which of those few products to create. He was highly disciplined, and he always said the most important decisions are not what you put in, it's what you leave out. And his ability to simplify, and always make sure that it was tested against the user experience.
Now, looking back at the years at Apple, what would you say you were most proud of?
I was most proud of being able to spend 10 years working with some of the most talented people I've ever met in my entire life. For me, it was a chance to learn just how many talented people are able to create things in small teams and actually transform the world. These people were, in most cases, far more talented than I was, and had just amazing passion about what they were doing. And being able to be a part of that community was just an extraordinary experience. And so I decided when I left Apple, I said, I've got to find a way that I can continue to get a seat at the table with talented people. And I decided the way to do that was not to be a CEO, because I'd done that a few times, but to be a mentor, and to be an investor, and to be a rainmaker. A rainmaker means help close deals.
The Rainmaker.
And so that's what I've been doing for 20 years, mentor, rainmaker, investor.
Yes. Is that the final reason why you kind of stopped working at Apple after a decade?
Well, the final reason I stopped working at Apple was that I was pushed out of Apple because the board and the management wanted to license the Macintosh technology, and I refused to do it. And so I was pushed out, and that was in 1993. And then subsequent to Steve Jobs coming back in 1990, end of 96, you know, almost 4 years later, they had gone through 2 more CEOs. When I left, Apple had $2 billion of cash. We'd grown 1,000% in the 10 years I'd been there. We were the largest selling personal computer in the world and the most profitable personal computer in the world. And by the time Steve came back, the company was almost bankrupt. The licensing strategy was the wrong way to go. Mm-hmm. And the first decision Steve made when he came back to Apple was he canceled the licensing strategy.
Best known today as the former CEO of Apple Computer, Scully's corporate career began in 1967 when, armed with a Wharton MBA, he was hired by Pepsi-Cola Company as a trainee. 3 years later, he became the company's youngest vice president for marketing, applying his ideas about experience-based marketing to the Pepsi Generation campaign. He initiated the Pepsi Challenge taste tests and oversaw development and launch of the first plastic soft drink bottle, which together dethroned Coca-Cola in the mid-1970s. By 1977, Scully was Pepsi-Cola company's youngest president and CEO. In 1983, Apple founder Steve Jobs persuaded Scully to transfer his consumer marketing talent to personal computers. Scully joined Steve Jobs and became CEO of Apple. When Scully left Apple, Apple's Macintosh was the largest seller of personal computers in the world. Since leaving Apple, Scully has earned a reputation for investing in and mentoring early-stage entrepreneurs who want to create transformational companies.
Your career has been a whirlwind, moving from the beverage industry into the computer industry and now into kind of being a mentor and in the healthcare industry. For some, you know, obviously many young the youths and young entrepreneurs are very curious as to whether, you know, you have a certain key to success in the business that you're doing. So what key of successes would you share with young entrepreneurs? Well,
it really isn't very complicated, at least complicated to talk about it. So it's a little more complicated to actually do it. Great companies are built by great teams of people. What we learn in the U.S. from our experience in seeing the success stories and role models of successful companies is that you always invest in the team. You don't invest in the business per se. You know, when you're starting out, chances are that the business model will change. You know, you have to adapt to changing opportunities, changing challenges. But if you have the right team, you can do that with greater probability that you're going to do it successfully. So it's always about the people. It's always about a clear vision that the leader can be able to express to the team, that he can or she can attract the very best talent to work with them, and then be able to motivate them and keep them focused. And then try to surround yourself with an ecosystem of investors, advisors, partners who could be helpful. But what's challenging in Vietnam is that we're at a very early stage of building that ecosystem. And so those role models still have to be created here. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do in Vietnam now.
You talked about this fact that your motivation is the fact that you yourself never had a mentor. You wish you had one,
yeah.
And this is what is keeping you going on. Also, this is a continuous learning process for you. What else keeps you motivated?
Well, I don't separate, there's no bright line in my life between work and friends. So I have a set of first principles. One first principle is I only work with my friends. So my relationships start with friendship, and then we see whether it develops into a work relationship. It's actually a great piece of advice because when you work with your friends, you develop a level of trust, a level of admiration for different talents that each of you have, and an openness, a transparency, which is so crucial if you're going to be doing something transformational. So I'm very excited to be able to work with my friends. And in the United States, we have a saying that our culture is we live to work. In Europe, the culture is just the reverse. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a different perspective, and that is they work to live. And so if you were in France, you might know someone for several years and have no idea what their job is. If you're in the United States, you know within 15 minutes what their job is, because work is such an integrated part of our life. What has impressed me in Vietnam is, and it's probably the Confucius roots of your culture, is that you have many of those same attributes that are naturally here for several thousand years. That there's a work ethic, there is a willingness to learn and work hard at it, and a curiosity. I have to say that I experienced something here in Vietnam I've never experienced anywhere else in the world, and that is people sitting in a session with me where we're having a conversation in Ho Chi Minh City. We did this 3 times for 3 hours in each session.
Wow.
Now, nobody in the United States would sit and listen to me for 3 hours. Just wouldn't happen.
We're patient people.
Well, I'd say what I've observed in Vietnam is very, very patient people.
Yes, but you got to be a good speaker in order for us to be that patient. So earlier on, we said that Mr. Scoley would reveal some of the details on his recent investments here in Vietnam. And Mr. Scoley has been working to co-found Misfit Wearables with Sunny Vu, a Vietnamese-American entrepreneur. And we'll take a look at their business here in Vietnam.
Since leaving Apple, John Scoley has been known as an investor in and a mentor for early-stage entrepreneurs who want to create transformational companies. Most recently, he co-founded Misfit Wearable with Sunny Vu and Sridhar Iyengar. Misfit invents and develops wearable sensor products for wellness and medical applications. The company's consumer products are worn on the body and measure a variety of health signals. Most of Misfit's staff are based in Ho Chi Minh City. There are young Vietnamese talents now working on advanced sensors algorithm research, software engineering, and software product design. Industrial design and hardware engineering are done at Misfit's offices in San Francisco.
So now we have here in our studio the co-founder and CEO of Misfit Wearables, Mr. Sunny Vu. Thank you very much for coming here to our studio. How are you today?
Great, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Can you share with us how did you become partners with Mr. John Scoley?
Well, you know, as John said it, you know, I'll start with friendship. We started to get to know each other a couple years ago over dinner, and we've just become friends over time. I mean, I'm honored to call him a friend. To me, he's more of a mentor as well, and it's just gone from there.
What made you decide to kind of bring investment here to the country in, you know, the current economic conditions?
Well, first of all, Vietnam is one of the places where I call home, the other being the United States. So it's great to be back home. I have family here. My wife's from here, so we love being here, and we're comfortable here. But the other part of it is just the talent that's available, world-class talent. You know, people who are Olympic math medalists and whatnot, chess champions. You know, we have several of those in our company. We only have 15 people right now in Vietnam, but probably a third of them are internationally recognized with their skills. And so we're investing here all in because you know, we do all of our software development, all of our algorithms development, advanced research here in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City, and soon in Hanoi.
Another role model experience from America is that talented teams attract talented teams. If you start off with mediocre employees, the chances are you'll continue to have mediocre employees. So companies like Google and Apple and Microsoft have set extremely high standards in terms of the kinds of people that they want to attract to their companies. And they've been very consistent over the years not to compromise on that. So it's legendary inside of each of those companies how rigorous the interviewing process is in order to get accepted for a job. I remember it was that way at Apple when I was there. It's legendary at Google. It's legendary at Microsoft. You know, you have to take comprehensive puzzle tests to demonstrate your ability to solve in innovative ways, complex thought problems, and this is what we're doing.
Where do you see kind of Vietnamese economy growing into the future, seeing that you will obviously have your company here in the long run?
Well, Vietnam has a lot of different things that it has to offer to the world. But in the past, it's been a lot of products that are commodities and whatnot. But like I said, we've got some of the richest pools of talent in the world, and I think it's just about connecting that talent to the right opportunities. Why should we be making outsourcing and making someone's website when we could be making great products that have timeless value, that have great craftsmanship and passion in them?
Exactly. Well, thank you very much, Sunny, for joining us here today, and all of the best of luck in your future endeavors with Misfits Wearables, and also your partnership and work with Mr. John Scully as well. Thank you very much.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, also during his trip to Hanoi this time, Mr. John Scully, as he said, has had a chance to talk with 100 most talented students of high-tech universities here in the capital city to talk about the future technological trends. So let's have a look at that.
Today, Hanoi students had a golden chance to meet one of the most famous CEOs in the world in person. John Scully spent 2 hours of his busy schedule to discuss this year's technology trends with his students from 5 of Hanoi's most prestigious universities. The Q&A sessions share the expertise of industry insiders with the students who proved eager to find out more about world technology trends.
It's really surprised me because at first I think that maybe today people want to talk about the experience in the past, how they set up a new company, something that I can find easily in the internet. But today I find that the talk is about some new technology, some new trend of technology in Vietnam, and the way he talk very tenderly, but it brings a lot of value to people who listen to him.
Some megatrends John and other speakers predicted to be significant in the near future were the combination of biology and information technology, the flourishing of wearable computing, as well as big data mining. The new era is said to be all about information withdrawn from terabytes of data.
Trước đây em vẫn còn có một cái câu hỏi về cái big data này của mình. Thế là liệu có phải là cái xu hướng của thời đại không? Liệu có phải là một cái lĩnh vực mà mình có thể dồn hết niềm đam mê của mình không? Tất nhiên là mình có dồn rồi, nhưng mà mình luôn luôn phải quan tâm xem là thị trường thế nào. Thì hôm nay ông ấy đã giải đáp cho em cái câu hỏi này. Thế ông đã cho mình biết được rằng là đây là một cái xu hướng tất yếu, một cái mà củng cố thêm lòng tin mình thôi. Trước đây mình cũng tin rồi, nhưng mà củng cố thêm một cái lòng tin cho mình để mình có thể toàn tâm toàn ý để mà tập trung vào nó.
John Scully was impressed by the students.
I do believe that the skills are here, particularly with the students that we're meeting, that many of the advanced technologies, the algorithms, can well be developed here in Vietnam. And they will have huge impact potentially on very large markets, much bigger than Vietnam, whether it's in Europe or the United States.
Earlier, in a meeting with leading Vietnamese IT giant, the FPT Corporation, John Scully also shared his views on developing trends in the next 5 to 10 years. He gave FPT's development strategy a stamp of approval.
Actually, we're sharing the same view on the future of the world. He talked about the cloud. We talk about cloud. We talk about the mobilities. We talk about big data. We talk about securities. We talk about healthcare. We talk about education. We talk about smart world. And the same matters. The same view on the world. As the matter is how you implement that to the real life. And that again depends on how hard work you are, how innovative you are, and the same chance with everybody. I think that's very important.
Throughout our talk, you mentioned that one of the biggest disadvantages that Vietnam has currently is there isn't enough role models. What other advantages or disadvantages do you see about Vietnam's economy right now?
Well, I think in terms of the global economy, Vietnam is very dependent on what happens in other places. The industries that one from the West thinks of in Vietnam as we think of textiles, we think of agricultural products, we think of rubber for tires. So these are commodities, and they're ones which depend upon international markets. And at this time, in a challenging global economy, exports are weak in Vietnam. There's not much Vietnam can do about that because you're so dependent on what happens in markets outside of Vietnam. So then the real question is, what can you do things about? And high tech is one of those things where you actually have an extraordinary talent pool of well-educated people who are world-class. Some of them have gone to university outside of Vietnam and come back. Some of them have been educated in Vietnam, but because of the way that you test as people progress through their lives as young people in Vietnam, that it brings to the surface, really the cream of talent.
Do you have any forecasts for Vietnam and its economy in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think the guiding word would be patience. I don't see any quick turnaround in the Vietnam economy because I don't see any quick turnaround in the global economy. So Vietnam is very dependent on the rest of the global economy. But I think that the Confucius culture of hard work, patience, high ethics, and great focus on education, I mean, all of these things are long-term going to be extremely advantageous to Vietnam. So if I look at Vietnam over a longer term, I only see with great optimism. But short term, your challenges are no different than the rest of the global economy. It's very, very challenging.
Now, what are the top three things, if you can name them, that a strategic entrepreneur should never forget?
I think you need to be working in a company for the right reasons. When I was in Apple, working with Steve Jobs, working with Bill Gates, because he was a close partner to Apple with his software applications, I cannot recall a single conversation with either one of them where we ever talked about money. Money was not the destination. Money was the consequence. And Steve was never actually that much interested in money. He was interested in no compromise, beautiful products, changing the world, making people's lives different, as he would say, making a dent in the universe. And Bill was the same way. They had completely different philosophies of how to do it. They couldn't have been more radically different, and yet both of their strategies were immensely successful. So make sure you're in a company for the right reasons. It isn't just to join a company to make money. It's to join a company because you think you can make a contribution to the success of the company. We have a saying in America, get the right people on the bus and get them on the right seats on the bus, which means that success in an entrepreneurial business is always about the team. It's not about one individual. So that's why you need the right people on the bus, get them in the right seats on the bus. That's why I said in retrospect, I wish I hadn't been picked as CEO of Apple, though I still wish I was hired by Apple for 10 years, because I think Steve would have been the natural CEO, even though he was young, because he was the product visionary, and that was a product-centric business. And I could been at his side as the marketing guy. But it's really important not to let your ego get in the way. Fortunately, I don't think Vietnamese have egos like we do in the United States, because our culture is very much about the individual. Asian culture tends to be about harmony of the group, and that's a wonderful characteristic to develop, because while celebrating the creativity of the individual, gives us companies like Facebook and Twitter and Apple and Google and so forth, that harmony of the team, is an equally important value.
I'm pretty sure many young entrepreneurs would be curious. I mean, you mentioned that work is a big part of your life. I mean, you're obviously very passionate about it. You're working until now, and you work with your friends and families, which makes it a big part of your life. So how would you define happiness?
Well, I'm very lucky that I have a wonderful relationship with Diane, who's very special in my life, and she travels with me, and she's supportive to me in my business, and together we don't have a bright line between the business I work on and the friends we have together, so that I can be virtual. In other words, I can be traveling and have the love of my life with me, and yet at the same time I can be virtual over the my wireless iPad and my wireless smartphones, and be working with teams all over the world. And so it's work is something that I look forward to every day. I'm a morning person, so I'm up by 5 in the morning. I've already spent several hours communicating with people today in Hong Kong, India, Toronto, and Austin, Texas, and Palm Beach, Florida. So, and that's just today. Yes. So I can be virtual in every way, and I don't really think of this as work. I think of it as this is what I do.
It's your life.
It's my life.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for coming onto our show, sharing your passion, and that is, being in this business world, being a mentor, being a real life model, a role model to many young entrepreneurs out there, especially here in Vietnam. We wish you the best of health and luck and success in your future road.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, sir. And that wraps up this edition of Talk Vietnam with Mr. John Scoley as well as Sunny Vu. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you more next time here on Talk Vietnam. Goodbye.